Hey all, it's Jawad with Hit the Apex podcast. How are we doing this week? Good to be back. Was really excited last week when we did the first one for the year, and just that excitement and energy and the buzz back into it. And same thing this week too. It's when you feel fresh, you really enjoy doing this. But I'm sure by the time we get to the end of the year, it'll feel like I feel like, I need a break again. I need a break. But, everything in moderation is great. But while there's so many exciting things to talk about at the moment, I can't really contain myself. So we'll get straight into it anyway. Where's summer gone? I mean, seriously, it's like we are recording a podcast in the middle of winter when we're in the depth or we're in the depths of a Formula One season, MotoGP season, Supercars as well. They're usually escaping the winter and going up to the top end of Australia. But here we are in the middle of February. Oh, wait, it's the end of February now. Great. In the end of February, and it feels like we're in May or June or something. So, need a few good days yet before we wave goodbye to summer and have a few more outings at the beach. I think that'd be pretty good. Went for a swim on Sunday actually. It was pretty warm throughout most of the day, but then in the evening when I do usually go out to the beach, it just cooled down rapidly, and I guess the water was okay. Once you get in there, you sort of climatise to it, but yeah, it wasn't ideal. It took a while to want to go in all the way, but in the end, you always have good fun out in the water. So yeah, that. There was also the V8 Supercars on the weekend, Supercars Championship, the first round in Adelaide, which I'm going to be doing the talking points for you straight off the bat. Really excited to have Supercars back, and it was a good weekend too. A lot of talking points heading into the weekend, of course, with the departure of Holden and what have you, but I think at the end of the day, we saw some good racing on track. As much as, maybe the crowd numbers didn't show it over the weekend. There was a drop of 60,000 compared to last year for the whole weekend, which has prompted a lot of debate and discussion about, the future of the Adelaide 500. I personally don't think anything's going to happen. Perhaps they might cut the events to the event to a 3-day one instead of the 4 days that they have at the moment. But there's probably quite a few factors as to why less people went this year. When I'm not one to deliberate and to think about that, but you've got to take everything into account as well. I mean, we've had obviously probably the first thing that springs to mind. It's been a very harsh summer as far as the impact of the bushfires have had. A lot of people have been donating money. There could be people who usually travel to the Adelaide 500 that have not been able to because of various reasons, and one of them could be, due to the bushfire devastation. I mean, Kangaroo Island, of course, which is a beautiful part of South Australia, of course, didn't get to go there last year. There could be people there who wanted to go all over the country. So, yeah, there could be a variety of reasons why we've had a drop in spectators for this year. So I wouldn't be too concerned, but I know there are some parties that are also on this week's podcast. We'll go back and talk about the first week of testing, or not really a week, it's 3 days. The first 3 days of testing. They're obviously started the second test yesterday, so today will be day 2. Later on they'll hit the track. Not going to really talk about what happened in the second test, it's more about the first, and then next week we'll do the second test as well and do a pre-season debrief of sorts. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about the supercars. And straight off the bat, well, Holden was the big talking point heading into the weekend, and then even coming out of the weekend, it was Holden again, but not for those reasons. It was because they had a pretty strong weekend to start off the year. So we got the news on Saturday or Friday night actually that Red Bull Holden Racing Team have confirmed their driver lineup for next year. They've retained Jamie Whincup for one more year, or he signed on for an extra year. There was all that conjecture about whether he'd be retiring or not. But he has decided to go around one last time in 2021 before you'd assume that after then he would scale back his commitments, maybe step into a co-driver shoes beyond that. But then you've got Shane Van Gisbergen, who's been confirmed on a multi-year deal with that organisation. And I guess a key thing also to think about is what's in store for that organisation beyond the end of this year. So obviously they're the factory Holden racing team at the moment. Roland Dane, the team principal or the team boss, has gone over to meet with GM over the weekend to discuss what the future might hold with them. You'd think that next year that they would run Commodores because they're allowed to without any Holden branding. One team that we know that won't do that is Walkinshaw. So Walkinshaw have come out and said that they won't be racing the Commodore in 2021, which will mean that they're going to be racing a new car, so whether that's with a new manufacturer or are they going to fast track some of the Gen 3 components to allow the Camaro to make a debut in 2021, we'll have to wait and see, but that's a pretty big piece there to hear that Walkinshaw, the former Holden racing team, of course, will be stepping away from the Commodore nameplate altogether for 2021. So that's all the off-track stuff. On track, we had Jamie Whincup in vintage form on Saturday for race 1. So gets a new contract under his belt and pretty much comes out and dominates. He got pole position after he actually was 8th quickest to make it into the top 10 shootout, but then in the shootout he went straight to the top and stayed there until the end of the session. So he started on pole position from David Reynolds, got the better start, he got a whole shot, and basically didn't look back. So he pretty much spent the entire race in the lead, and then behind him is where you had a bit of stuff going on for the minor podium places. So we had Scott McLaughlin, of course, the reigning champion, Shane Van Gisbergen, utilising some cheeky strategy options to get themselves on the podium. So McLaughlin did a long fill in the first stop and then ended up short filling in the second stop, which put him ahead of a bunch of put him ahead of a bunch of cars, and Van Gisbergen as well on kind of a similar strategy got himself ahead. So that was unfortunate for the likes of Reynolds and even Chaz Mostert, who from the outset was quite quick all weekend. We saw him in the test at Tailem Bend last week. He was 7th fastest, I think, and we thought, he's immediately kind of brought a bit of buoyancy to this team and a bit of form. But we know that typically around Adelaide, Walkinshaw, their Commodores have been always quite strong. So perhaps there's a bit of flattery in there, but you could also see that there is a change of dynamic within that team. It seems a bit more positive at the moment with the addition of Mostert and his engineer Adam DeBore, and that's what we saw on Sunday, him finishing on the podium. So who would have picked that coming into the weekend, I think, or even coming into the year, that the first weekend with Chaz Mostert and that team, we'd see them on the podium. But baby steps yet. We've got to wait till we go to a variety of different tracks. As I said before, Walkinshaw usually do rather well on street circuits, and particularly Adelaide. They've won there in the past, but then through the middle part of the season, they kind of taper off and whatnot, and we don't really see them feature much at the Grand Prix, the Melbourne 400, which is the next round, and even in Tasmania, which is the round after. So it'll be about bringing consistency to all rounds, I think, for Mostert and for WAU. But I guess this is a positive start, and when there's a positive mindset, you can only get better from there. So that's that. Race 2 was very interesting. It was good fun to watch. We had a lot of pit stop errors between the top two teams, so we had a front row lockout between Van Gisbergen and McLaughlin. Van Gisbergen on pole. Will Davison almost had pole, but he just butchered it in the second sector, I think, on the final corner, final two corners actually. He had the best sectors, and then just on the second to last corner, massive lockup, and there goes his pole position opportunity. So that was a big miss for those guys, and I'll talk about Tickford in a sec. But yeah, Van Gisbergen and McLaughlin, the old foes, back on the front row of the grid. McLaughlin got the better start. led the first portion of the race. Then we get into the first round of pit stops, and then a bit of a brain fade from his team saw Van Gisbergen take back the lead. So what had happened is now this year, because Shell V Power Racing won the team's championship last year, they get the front, they get the first lot of garages, the first pit bay, and basically the advantage of that is that they can see what's going on behind them. So with the Red Bull guys directly behind the Penske guys, you can basically see how their pit stop is going, and if they're finished and drop the car, then you have the advantage of dropping the car first. But what happened is that they basically didn't take heed to that, and as a result, they dropped Van Gisbergen first, and he basically got a couple of car lengths on him before McLaughlin actually got released. So, second phase of the race, Van Gisbergen back in the lead. We think that that's game over because the Holdens had the better pace over the weekend, and McLaughlin wasn't really looking as if he was catching up or anything like that. But then there's a twist in the tail, because in the second stop, Van Gisbergen gets underfueled. So what happens is that the car drops from the jacks. The refueler is still trying to refuel, but the car's been released and he's gone. And from that moment, when we saw on the TV images, it was like, okay, this doesn't seem right. I don't think that they've got all the fuel in that car. So from there, it was a question mark whether he'd get to the end or not, but it wasn't long before they came on the team radio and said, we haven't met our fuel requirement, because they've got to do, I think, 140 litres per race. That's required to be put into the car during the race in the pit stop. So, because that was not done, they had to pit for a third time, and basically that took him out of the race for the win. It didn't take him out, of course, of the race for the podium, but it wasn't until after that pit stop that it just started to unravel for Gizzy, because he had a suspension fail. Basically, he couldn't hang on to the podium, and that's it. That was a DNF for him, so no points on the day, or I think he might have scored a couple of points. If you're a classified finisher, you do get points to every two last position in Supercars, so that was a big hit for Van Gisbergen, of course, and in this championship, because it is so competitive, any points lost can come back to bite you at the end of the year. So, yeah, that was Van Gisbergen's race, and as a result, we had Mostert, of course, elevated to P2, and then Cameron Waters was good all weekend for Tickford and finished third. So, yeah, bit of luck for Van Gisbergen, but then again, McLaughlin and Shell V Power, I think, got a get out of jail free card too after that pit stop. They just, in comparison to the Red Bull Holdens, did not have the pace at all. And could this be a narrative that we look at all year long, because they had the upper hand did Red Bull? So does DGR Team Penske have some work cut out for them? And I think, again, we're going to have to go to a couple more circuits before we can determine that, because I guess passing is a bit hard, or being in the dirty air and whatnot, and because they've dropped, they've reduced so much aero because they've reduced so much aero this year, it might affect the way a car follows each other as well. So we're going to have to see when we get to the next few races. Of course, Albert Park is going to be high-speed corners, combination of those and some low-speed, lot of space for passing as well. We see them usually on the front straight, fan out like 4 cars abreast going into turn 1, so maybe it's a different story. And of course, last year we saw the Ford sweep that event, 4 wins out of 4 races, so perhaps we might see the Mustangs do a bit better over there, but at the same time, it's easy to say that these aero changes have come back in favour of the Holdens as well. And then quickly too, a lot of feedback about the switch over to the standard or the standardised shock absorbers or whatever. So some drivers like them, some drivers hate them. Obviously, it'll be the drivers of the bigger teams that'll hate them, because they've had the luxury of using superior springs and shock absorbers, whilst the smaller teams and the drivers that are sort of in the midfield to the back markers, they probably got a bit of a benefit knowing that they're on the same shock absorber now as the big teams. Impressed again with the way Walkinshaw rolled out with Mostert that weekend. Bryce Fullwood, his teammate, obviously rookie weekend, first full-time race on his own because he did the Enduros last year for Kelly Racing. Had a, obviously inconsistencies got to be ironed out, and had a few incidents as well. So that's obviously going to be where he starts to grow and develop. Tickford, so the Tickford Cup, as the commentators labelled, or I think it was Mostert himself labelled, because he was actually involved with a couple of those drivers, chiefly Waters and Davison on the first day. Yeah, on during race one, and it was almost like he was back at that team. And as you know, Waters and Mostert have had a bit of history, of course. And last year, Bathurst, Mostert took out Waters last year, heading into the chase, basically throwing away a good opportunity for those guys to get a good result at the mountain. As I said before, Davison on pole almost. But yeah, good to see all four drivers in that team. Competitive, of course. Lee Holdsworth got up there into the top 10, and Jack LeBrock as well, his first weekend for that team. And a bit of a spring in his step compared to how things were last year with Techno, and things weren't looking too great. So he's got a good car under his belt, but they're just going to have to get some good results going. That's a car that is capable of pole positions, as Will Davison showed, can get there if they don't make mistakes, and even going for race wins too, I think. So as far as the championship itself is concerned, I still think it'll be between Red Bull and DGR Team Penske, but at the same time, unlike last year, there's more room and more opportunity for other teams to get up there and win races to take away championship points from those protagonists. So Walkinshaw, they look like a team that could win this year if they keep showing the form that they did in Adelaide. Tickford as well, I can see them winning some races. Erebus as well, they were quick straight off the bat. I mean, David Reynolds was fast, and so was Anton at the Tailem Bend test. But then, of course, there was just contact between the two teammates in race 2 at the start. So really, it's just their inconsistencies that are masking the speed of that car. There was someone who commented on one of my pieces last week that said something about, the championship window perhaps for Reynolds is closing, and, that's not something you want to hear, especially if you've signed a 10-year deal with that team, and this is the first year of that deal. So Reynolds is going to be hoping for some kind of speed to be more consistent. He's got to be more consistent in his performances too. Same with Anton, I guess. A clash like that can't dent their confidence. And for Anton too, it's a key year because he's off contract at the end of the year. And there's already been a lot of talk and speculation about potentially going over to one of the big teams. It's not going to be Triple Eight now because they've locked in their driver lineup. So Shell V-Power Racing, they've got, supposedly both drivers off contract for next year. Potentially Scott McLaughlin's going to go overseas to race in the US with IndyCar, and Fabian Coulthard, he's, as always, seems to be as portrayed in the media, driving for his career at DGR Team Penske. So opportunities there for Anton, and we'd hope to see more of those performances that we saw last year from him, which got him on the podium a couple of times. It wouldn't be Adelaide without a lot of incidents happening, and of course it's the first day back at school, so a lot of people do make mistakes and whatnot. It wasn't as hot as it was last year, that was the feedback, but still, guys like Mostert were saying, that the pedal box basically, burnt his feet and everything gets really hot, so that's just typical Adelaide stuff. Unfortunately for Scott Pye, not the greatest start to his career at, not really his career, but his new home at Team 18, he had a lot of incidents happen. Had to even rebuild the car on Friday, get it ready for Saturday, so he could be able to compete. But then, just not really anywhere. But we hope that he does improve because that team has some good pace in it this year, as we've seen with Mark Winterbottom in the Irwin racing car, was in the top 10 on Saturday, but then just outside it on Sunday, finishing 11th. dismal debut for Jack Smith, you got to say. Even though it's not really his debut because he did a few wildcard races last year, including at the Tailem Bend when we went down there, got some photos of the car and everything, the SCT tools entry for Brad Jones Racing. But, amongst getting involved in incidents, copping fines for not showing up for photos and for anthems and all that sort of stuff on the grid, I mean, that's not really what you want on your debut, is it? And then also copping some penalties as well across the weekend. So you'd hope that he's one to ring his head in, of course, for the rest of the year because, that's not going to cut it, unfortunately, in Supercars. But not the greatest start for him. Already said, Forward, unfortunately, didn't have the most pleasant debut weekends, but he's surely going to learn from it. The best of the rookies easily was Zane Goddard in the second Matt Stone Racing, the super light entry, because he's going to be sharing the car with Jake Kostecki, who'll jump in for the Grand Prix. But Goddard, just on it straight away, stayed out of trouble. Didn't really hear much from him all weekend, just putting in solid performances. So really looking forward to see how Kostecki does now because, those two perhaps are gonna have a cracking year, if they continue to fly under the radar and not really cause trouble, but, get some good positions and finishes on the way as well to the end. Other bits of optimism, I think, Kelly Racing, they did quite well. They were in the top 10 for most of the weekend, of course, between Rick Kelly and Andre Heimgartner. It was a bit of a shame on Sunday to see Rick Kelly get involved in the pits again like he did last year. Probably not as bad as what happened with Chaz Mostert last year when he was in the Tickford Mustang. But yeah, had a bit of a clash with Macaulay Jones this time, so that kind of spoiled his race. Already said Team 18, with Winterbottom, they look like they're going to have a better year this year. They're going to benefit from having a second car as well, and hopefully Scott Pye can also take the number 20 car up as well, along with the 18. So that's about it for Adelaide, I think. It was just really exciting seeing Supercars back on the TV, Super 2 as well. Even though they've got a tiny grid this year, it's looking very competitive. You've got two Kostecki brothers, of course, Brody and Kurt. Brody looking very competitive, and also Thomas Randall too, and it was kind of an emotional weekend for him because obviously we've heard that he's been diagnosed with testicular cancer and he's got to take some time to get some chemo done as well, but he came into the weekend and said, he's going to be, trying to emulate Jason Richards, the late Jason Richards, who of course lost his own battle with cancer a few years ago, and how he basically came out and was able to win in that weekend on Adelaide for Super 2 and the development series. So we saw Randall on Sunday do that in the Sky Sands Nissan, so great job from him. And of course we're hoping that he is back for the second round of Super 2 in Tassie. In between he's going to be taking on a round of chemo, so yeah, we'd hope that he's fit for the second round, and all the best to him too. It's such huge, it's devastating to hear, but also at the same time, he's doing really well to stay positive and still race as well, do what he loves. So that's that. F1 testing now, the first week, and surprise, surprise, Mercedes were fastest overall, throughout the week. They started the second test as well pretty quick, but we'll do that next week. But yeah, fastest overall. And then they blew our minds with this new invention that they've come up with, and this is the great thing about Mercedes, is that even though they've won 6 championships in a row and just basically blown their competition out of the water, they're not resting on their laurels. They're trying to find every advantage they can. They're trying to innovate as much as they can, and they blew our minds. Everyone was talking about DAS, the dual axis steering. So basically it was, and we wouldn't have spotted this if, this is kudos to F1 as well for actually telecasting testing, for the first time. Unfortunately not here in Australia. It's restricted to live timing that only works when it wants to as well. But we wouldn't have spotted this, or the other teams wouldn't have spotted this either, because they wouldn't have had onboard shots if they didn't have broadcasters on site for testing. So basically what it is that, rather than being able to just turn your steering wheel left and right, blah, 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 they can actually push the steering wheel forwards and pull it back. So basically where everyone went crazy was that there was a lap that Hamilton came onto the pit straight, and basically pulled the steering wheel towards him, which changed the toe of the front wheels into a certain degree that perhaps makes it less, gives less wear on the tyres. Like it's no one's. I mean, I'm still trying to get my head around how it all works, because Mercedes obviously aren't going to explain to us what the actual purpose of this device or this innovation is. They're probably saying "Das ist gut," for us. There you go. I put the title of this episode in there. You know why I said "Das ist gut" now for the title. Das, D-A-S. Okay, that's enough. So, yeah, basically what the FIA have done now is, they haven't done, they did this last year when they published the 2021 rules, because apparently they knew about this Mercedes device for a while now, is that for next year they've outlawed it through one of their regulations where the steering wheel can only turn on, either left or right, can't go forwards and backwards. So anyone else is not going to be able to do it this year. A few of the teams have already said if they were to start developing now, researching it, it won't be ready until the middle of the season. So what advantages does it actually give Mercedes? It's unknown. So even that, do you want to really waste your time trying to do that? Maybe if you're Force India, not Force India, Racing Point. It's been a whole year now and I still call them Force India. Wow. Because Racing Point, they caught everyone's attention for basically rocking up to testing in a pink Mercedes. I first saw it was just the front wing looked, and the nose looked exactly like the Mercedes one, but apparently there are other elements on the car externally that match the Mercedes. So they were really quick, they were really consistent, but it really started a war of words between rival teams, and in particular Haas, who are like, that's not on. But then again, they were giving feedback to Haas saying, well, you basically run a B-spec Ferrari, so what are you talking about? Just basically, it's all started already between the midfield teams, but yeah, Racing Point looking really quick already. But going back to Mercedes, They had the most laps of anyone so far. They looked the most bulletproof, fastest as well, of course. They, unlike last year in testing where they didn't actually take on the C5 compound tyre, which is the softest compound that they're allowed to run in testing, until the final day. They've already started doing soft tyre runs and everything. So, they're just looking really, really strong at the moment. And it was only Kimi Raikkonen's lap in the Alfa Romeo on day 2 that was the only time a Mercedes wasn't fastest, but that fastest lap is still 1.3 seconds slower than what Bottas set on the final day, his fastest lap. So it just goes to show you how far ahead Mercedes are. But is that really the case if they're that far ahead? Ferrari, they've come out and said that they believe they're on the back foot. Everyone looks and says that they're on the back foot, and that was in Matteo Binotto's own words, that they're on the back foot. They've got a radical new car, the SF1000, but they haven't really shown any signs of pace yet. Even on the long runs and everything, it just doesn't look like, something doesn't seem too right. It's not like Red Bull, who you kind of know or can feel that they're flying under the radar. They've been able to put in the second most laps behind Mercedes, but haven't really shown any pace yet. So, getting all those laps under their belt does show that the Honda power unit this year is really reliable. Same thing can be said about Alpha Tauri, not Tauri, as I've been saying up until the start of this year. It's a Tauri. Oh, well. I still don't know how we're going to get around Alpha and Alpha, Alfa Romeo and Alpha Tauri, because it's a bit of a mouthful. It's like Raikkonen in the Alfa Romeo. You'd rather say Raikkonen in the Alpha rather than And then also Gasly or Fiat in the Alpha Tauris. I want to say Alpha. It's easier to say the shorter thing than it is to go the long way. I mean, I can't just call it a Toro Rosso now, can I? And also, as far as the Alpha's concerned, I can't call it a Sauber. We might as well then call Racing Point the Force India, even though it's not Force India anymore. Anyway, before we get too out of hand, Red Bull, Honda, they're looking really solid. Just need to see some pace from them, but at the same time, they don't have to show it. Yeah, they feel like they've had a more positive start to the preseason than they've had in previous years, and that's going to be really important because Red Bull have typically rolled out in the first few rounds of the new seasons on the back foot, and they usually can't string together a whole season. So if they are going to mount a championship challenge this year, which everyone has indicated yet that yes, they've got to this year, and Verstappen is going to be your key operator in that, they've got to get to Australia the first race and be on it straight away. So whereas Ferrari are just going to be Ferrari, hey? Who knows? They might come to Melbourne and basically blow the competition out of the water. That's testing for you. It's all dust, mothballs, sandbags. It's nothing to be too excited about, unless you're in the midfield, because it's good to see when other teams that have struggled have made progress. So McLaren, you got to say, one of the best starts to a preseason that they've had since the pre-hybrid era. I do believe this year is going to be hard work for them to keep P4 in the World Championship, unless they do have a leg up on the competition, because Racing Point are looking really quick in their pink Mercedes. Renault have got to have a really good year too. You've got to say, I've been saying it all along, end of last year and also start of this year, they've got a radical car on their hands, a new nose and front wing concept, and they've just been really inconsistent so far, even in testing. So it wasn't until the final day that they showed some pace, but I'm not too convinced yet that where they are. But still, McLaren, Racing Point, Alpha Tauri as well, looking really good. A more positive start for Williams too, you got to say. They have come to Barcelona this year and actually have been able to run their car, or actually they've actually turned up to the test with a car and been able to turn over quite a few laps too. So that's been exciting for both George Russell and Nicholas Latifi. Should see those guys in the points a bit more frequently. The only team to be worried about at the moment so far after the first test, I reckon, is Haas. So they're the only team that actually crashed in the first test, and they crashed twice. So one for Roman Grosjean and one for Kevin Magnussen. And I can't wait to see next year's Netflix series for Drive to Survive and see Günther Steiner's reaction to that, because I'm sure it wasn't a pretty one. The trailer for Season 2, which obviously I think this week, I'm hoping it's tomorrow, Friday the 28th, that it's going to come out, and already getting a bit of Gunter action in the trailer, so about kicking down a door or something. So that guy just seems so intense and hardcore. We love it. Good drama. So really looking forward to that. If it is out tomorrow, then that's all I'm going to do this weekend, is just lock the doors. I'm not going to roll down the blinds and need some sunlight, obviously, but yeah, lock the doors, sit there with some, fine beverages or whatever. Probably not fine, just a good beer or something, and watch Drive to Survive, because the first season was fascinating and really good. And as I said, they already had the Netflix cameras out, already had them out for testing, so looks like they're going to be doing a third season as well based on the 2020 championship. So basically conclusions, I guess, to take away from the first test, as the seasoned F1 viewer, consumer, analyzer, whatever, will tell you that testing is not meant to really give you anything conclusive, and it'll all change before the first race or when we get to the first practice session in Melbourne. But just a couple of things to take away. Mercedes look really quick again. They look consistent. Ferrari perhaps need to show their hand. Same with Red Bull as well, but Red Bull look like they're in a better space than Ferrari at the moment. I think we're going to have a more competitive midfield. It's going to be harder work for P4, but McLaren have been really strong so far, even though they haven't shown really turned up the wick yet, but they've been consistent. Same with Racing Point, but even though they've been quick, positive start for Williams, not so positive for Haas, and a bit of work to do for Renault as well. So it'll be interesting to see how the next 2 days progress as well. Of course, the last 2 days that they have available for testing. So yeah, and then after that, it's all eyes on Melbourne. First race in a couple of weeks' time, and start of this 2020 championship. And quickly as well, we had news as well of Fernando Alonso rejoining McLaren for the Indy 500, of course. So wasn't able to, as in his own words, go explore other options or whatever, because basically he wanted to race for Andretti. They're a top team, but then that decision was torpedoed by Honda, because Honda is still not happy with having their engines described as GP2 spec by Mr. Alonso back in 2000, was it 15 or 16? One of those years, 17, where it was a torrid year for him, McLaren, and for Honda. So, yeah, obviously joining McLaren, the Arrows SP McLaren team, formerly Schmidt-Peterson Motorsport, and a lot more resources at their disposal this time to potentially give him a car that could be competitive at the Indy 500. Will he do some other races too? Well, you'd hope so, just to get some preparation. Be nice to see him do the Grand Prix of Indianapolis as well, which we know Scott McLaughlin will be doing for Team Penske. I can't wait for that. And it's a bit disappointing, actually, that we don't have any IndyCar broadcast. There's no IndyCar broadcast here in Australia at the moment, so hopefully that's something that can change before the season starts, because I'd really love to watch IndyCar this year full time. Probably not, watching them live as much as I can, but, on replay like I have been doing with Formula E. So, and we've got the Marrakesh E-Prix on this weekend, which I'm excited to see as well. And just thinking about it too before, it looks like I haven't really been able to follow the other seasons quite closely as I have so far this one, but it looks like Jean-Eric Vergne has got his work cut out for him, you got to say, with Antonio Felix da Costa there, and I don't think da Costa's going to show any quarter, so this might be an intense rivalry forming at the championship winning team. So I want to see that. I want to see sparks flying. I want to see a repeat of Rosberg v Hamilton, and then even a Senna v Prost style rivalry between teammates, especially there in Formula E. I think it's going to cause a bit of drama. So looking forward to that. Right, so I didn't want to finish this week's podcast without addressing the elephant in the room. There's no elephant in my room, luckily, but there is a big thing that I did bring up last week, what's going on in the world at the moment, and that is the coronavirus. So impact obviously being felt worldwide. Now there's been over 2,700 deaths reported, and several thousand cases of the actual virus confirmed. I'm just going to talk about it as far as how it's going to impact F1 and how it is impacting F1 at the moment. So we have had word that obviously the Chinese Grand Prix has been cancelled, or postponed, I should say, because they are looking to reschedule at another date, even though I don't think it's possible. The FIA are monitoring what's going on in Vietnam at the moment too, and we had some pictures, obviously, of the track being completed, which is really positive, and they're hoping that we will get to have a race in Vietnam, but possibly Bahrain now. So the latest breakouts of the virus have occurred in pockets in the Middle East, so Iran and Bahrain. There was actually flights out of Bahrain to Dubai suspended for a period of 48 hours as well. And then the more concerning part, I think, is the sudden breakout in Italy, where there's actually been quite a few cases reported in Italy, and already the first thing you think about is how's it going to affect the two teams that operate out of Italy. Obviously Ferrari and AlphaTauri. Ferrari have already put out a statement saying that they're restricting factory access in this time that the virus is at large. There's a crew, obviously, that have flown on private charter to the second test and everything, but all the other personnel back at the factory has anyone been affected, and etc. There's a whole lot to think about, when it comes to this sort of thing. And even personally, my own travel plans for this year potentially have been put on the back burner because of what's going on. If this doesn't improve, if the situation gets worse, then it's not going to be possible to be able to travel to not only one location but to several around the year, so around the world throughout the year. As far as the Australian Grand Prix is concerned, so far it's been declared safe by Victorian health officials, but it is the concern of people travelling over for the race, from abroad, and of course teams and crews, television and media and stuff that actually have to come from overseas to here. Will that have some kind of impact? German TV crews have kind of boycotted Vietnam. They don't want to travel there, so they're going to utilise a crew that's already on site for that weekend for their broadcast. So I guess my question, and it's fair to ask at this point, is that could this possibly derail the championship? Imagine if we do get to a situation where, and I know I'm being a bit of a doomsayer here, but imagine if we do get to a situation where Bahrain has to be cancelled and Vietnam, so you've instantly lost 3 races in the first 4 races of your championship, and how's that going to play on the championship itself? So this is something that, we've all got to take a bit seriously, especially with the F1 circus, and it's going to be something that we're going to be following quite closely. I know I'm following quite closely. I've got a few links open already about, the latest news, and of course I'm following the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, having a look at what's happening in Europe, of course, with what's happened in Italy, and if it's going to spread to other parts of the continent as well. So I know I'm ending it on a bit of a somber note, but also it's the state of affairs at the moment, and hopefully there can be some kind of containment and it doesn't really affect too much what's going to be a good year for the sport, for Formula One, and of course anyone else who is looking at travelling abroad and whatnot, and if it's affecting people's works and their livelihood. Obviously it's terrible, this thing, the people who have lost their lives, the people who are sick with it as well. It's just awful. So hard to see what the future holds. So that's pretty much it anyway. Thanks for tuning in as always. Remember, I'll include links to all my social media platforms in the description and the show notes, but you can follow us on Twitter at @HitTheApexMedia, and of course I did put out my Instagram last week as well, at Dr46th as well, if you'd like to keep up with some of my photography work, which I haven't really done much of since coming back from Bathurst, but I'm sure there's going to be some good stuff coming up throughout the year. So thank you for tuning in again this week. I'll be back same time next week for doing a full wrap-up of testing and looking ahead to the season ahead. So thank you, and see you next time.